Don't you have ears? One snapped, her voice sharp as she glared at Jungkook. He flinched, eyes dropping immediately to the floor, avoiding her gaze. What happened? Wine? He stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. I told you to get my dress ready, but clearly you didn't even bother to listen. Did you? She sat, her arms crossed as she tapped her foot impatiently. I did whine, he murmured, nervously glancing up at her before quickly looking away again. I ironed it just like you asked. Oh, really? Then why didn't I see it in my room, huh? Are you lying to me now? She sat with a scornful scoff, her eyes narrowing. Jungkook's eyes widened in surprise, but he knew he had left it in her room, neatly prepared. Just like she wanted, he gulped, his brows furrowing in confusion. As he tried to understand what could have gone wrong, I'm sure I left it there. Wine. He said softly, his voice tinged with worry. Maybe it got misplaced. Misplaced? She repeated with mocking laugh. Do you think I am an idiot, Jungkook? Or is it that you just don't care to listen to me? He bit his lip, trying to hold back the small tremble in his voice. Why was she always so cold to him? He had done exactly as she asked, but nothing he did ever seemed to be enough. I'm sorry, Vine. I'll go check again. Please don't be angry, he whispered, his eyes pleading. Angry? She raised a brow, looking at him with disdain. I don't have the time to waste being angry at someone who can't follow basic instructions. Jungkook nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. This was his wife, yet all he could do was silently obey and endure her sharp words. Only their parents knew about their marriage, and to everyone else, he was just her obedient helper, someone to order around. I will find it wine, he mumbled almost apologetically. I will make sure it's there right away. She huffed, turning away from him with a look of disappointment. Maybe one day she would see him as more than just someone to command. But for now, he had remained quiet, doing everything he could just to make her a little less unhappy. As Wine and Jungkook continued their tense exchange, someone stood quietly around the corner, listening with a sly grin spreading across his face. Hidden in the shadows, Henry, Wine's cousin, tilted his head, observing every heated word they exchanged. Once the argument ended and Wine strode off, leaving Jungkook to hurriedly search for her dress, Henry stepped forward, a smudge look in his eyes as he watched Jungkook disappear down the hall. Oh, poor Jungkook. He muttered under his breath, an amused smirk tugging at his lips. But I can't make this easy for you after all. Wine, she's mine. He chuckled softly to himself, recalling How one always put on a polite, friendly face for Jungkook in front of others, as if they were nothing more than cordial strangers. But alone, she barely spared him a glance, let alone a conversation, and Henry, her own cousin, had noticed it all. Carefully piecing together their strange, hidden relationship, Henry's gaze darkened, jealousy simmering just beneath the surface. So Jungkook wasn't just some servant to wine, he had overheard their parents talking once, and the truth was enough to fuel his envy even further they were married. But not for long, he whispered, leaning back against the wall with a self satisfied grin. You may be her husband, but you are nothing to her. She doesn't love you. His smile widened, curled, and calculating. And I will make sure she never does. Henry's mind raced with plans to keep pushing them apart, sowing seeds of doubt and anger whenever possible. He had moved the dress just to see how easily wine would lash out at Jungkook, and her reaction was exactly what he had hoped for. With one last smug glance down the hall, he turned on his heel and walked away. A dark determination flickering in his eyes. Jungkook didn't deserve her, and if he had to make Wine hate her own husband to keep her close, then so be it. Wine strode into her room, her frustration simmering beneath the surface. She settled onto the edge of her bed, still thinking over the earlier exchange. Moments later, Jungkook entered, carrying her new dress, carefully inspecting it for any creases. But before he could speak, the door opened again, and Henry walked in with the dress in hand, a smudged look playing on his face. Henry approached Wine, extending the dress toward her with an easy smile. Here, Wine, I thought you might be needing this. Wine looked at the dress in surprise and took it. Her brows knitting together, suspicion flashed in her eyes as she glanced between Jungkook and Henry. How did you get this, Henry? Jungkook stepped closer, frowning slightly as he recognized the dress. His voice was quiet but firm. This is the same dress I prepared for you earlier, Wine. I had already left it in your room. He sat looking at her with gentle concern. A pang of guilt settled in Wine's chest as she held the dress, remembering how she had lashed out at Jungkook just minutes before. Her gaze softened as she looked back at him, a trace of regret in her eyes. Henry, you should have told me. She sat, her voice tinged with remorse. She realized now that Jungkook had been telling the truth all along, and her heart twisted with guilt for doubting him. Henry's smile faltered for a brief moment, but he quickly recovered, giving a nonchalant shrug. Oh, well, I just found it and thought I would help you out, he replied with a casual smile, brushing off her comment. While looked back at Jungkook, her expression softening further, the truth was clear now. And she regretted not trusting him. Wine held the dress in her hands, her expression softening just slightly. As she glanced back at Henry, "Thank you, Henry," she murmured, giving him a small note of appreciation. But she barely acknowledged Jungkook, who stood quietly by the door, watching her with a hopeful expression, but gradually faded. He had been the one to prepare the dress, to take care of her needs, despite the cold wall she always kept between them. Yet, even now, she couldn't bring herself to say a single word of apology, not to him. Jungkook's heart sank as he took in her indifference. He managed a bitter smile, one that barely reached his eyes, and nodded faintly. He should have been used to it by now. But somehow, it always stung. Without a word, he turned and quietly left the room. After he closed the door behind him, Wine sighed, trying to shake off the lingering frustration. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate his efforts. She reminded herself, but she simply couldn't accept him. Her father's dying wish had been for her to marry Jungkook, a man he had chosen for his gentle nature, his honesty, and his kind heart. Her father had insisted that Jungkook was the one person who would care for her, protect her, and remain loyal, no matter the circumstances. And Jungkook was all those things, but he was also a man who worked at a restaurant as a waiter. While she, the CEO of her own company, had risen the prominence after taking over her father's business, she had built it up, proving herself in an unforgiving world, achieving everything through sheer will and determination, and now here she was, tied by marriage to a man who was worlds away from her, both in lifestyle and in her heart. It wasn't because he was a waiter or wasn't wealthy. That had never been her issue. It was the feeling of obligation, of being forced into something she wasn't ready to accept. And because of that, she kept her distance, putting up a barrier between them that she didn't know how to bring down. Yet, a part of her felt a sting of guilt as she thought of Jungkook's quiet, disappointed smile. She had thanked Henry even after suspecting him, but not Jungkook, who had been exactly what she had asked. But that was the way it had to be, wasn't it? Outside her room, Jungkook walked down the hall, his head low. He had grown accustomed to her coldness, yet somehow it always hurt. It was almost as if the closer he tried to get, the further away she seemed. Later that evening, Wine descended the staircase. Dressed elegantly for the night's party, she stepped into the living room where Henry sat. Already waiting on the sofa in his own formal attire, his eyes lit up when he saw her. "There you are, ready to go?" he asked, standing up with a charming smile. Wine nodded, and they turned toward the door. Just as they were about to leave, however, a hesitant voice interrupted. Wine. She stopped, glancing over her shoulder to see Jungkook standing a few feet away, his expression both hopeful and uncertain. Hmm, could I come with you too? Just this once. His voice was soft, almost as if he feared he would overstep by even asking. While hesitating, considering his request, she wasn't used to him asking for anything. He usually just kept to his work around the house, chores he chose to do, not because she asked him to, but simply because he liked it. Before she could respond, Henry scoffed, stepping in with a smug look on his face. What would you do there, Jungkook? Those parties are not exactly for people of your type. He said, his tone dripping with disdain. They're not meant for waiters. Henry's words hung heavy in the air, and Wine's eyes widened in mild shock at his harshness. She had not expected him to speak so openly with such contempt, especially not in front of Jungkook. She glanced between them, noticing how Jungkook's hopeful expression faltered, his shoulders slumping slightly as he lowered his gaze. But even in his silence, his eyes shifted back to her, searching for any sign of approval, any indication that she might still let him join her. Despite Henry's cruel remark, after a beat she took a breath, lifting her chin. Alright, go on and get ready. Jungkook, she said, nodding slightly, we will wait. Jungkook's eyes widened with surprise and a soft smile appeared on his lips. For the first time, she had agreed to something he wanted. Something that gave him a chance to be by her side, even if only for a night. He nodded quickly, his face lightening up. Thank you, wine. I'll be ready in a minute. He said, his voice filled with excitement as he hurried off to prepare. Henry's face twisted in irritation as he watched Chunk disappear down the hall. Seriously, why does he even want to come? He muttered under his breath, casting a dark look in the direction Jungkook had gone. The last thing he wanted was Jungkook tagging along. Why didn't respond to Henry's complaint? She remained thoughtful, wondering for a moment why she had agreed to be Jungkook join them. Maybe it was seeing the quiet hope in his eyes, or perhaps a subtle guilt from the way things had gone earlier. With Jungkook soon joining them, she steeled herself for whatever was to come. The party was in full swing when Wine, Henry, and Jungkook arrived at the grand hall. Lively music pulsed through the air, and glamorous lights illuminated the elegantly dressed crowd. Wine, every bit the powerful CEO, attracted glances as she entered, exuding confidence. Jungkook followed a few steps behind, looking a bit out of place in his simple suit, though he still held himself with quiet dignity. As the night wore on, Henry stayed close to Wine. Clearly enjoying the attention they drew together, Jungkook kept his distance, quietly watching over her, though his gaze softened each time he catch her laughing or mingling with others. Wine's glass was never empty, people kept toasting to her success. Offering drinks that she accepted without much thought, by midnight, Wine's steps had grown unsteady, and her normally sharp gaze had a slight dazed gleam to it. She had clearly had more than her usual limit, and Jungkook noticed immediately. Henry, however, was laughing along with the crowd, oblivious or perhaps purposely ignoring her growing intoxication. Suddenly, Wine stumbled slightly, and Jungkook, noticing from across the room, moved toward her instinctively. Just as she swayed, he was there, reaching out to steady her. Wine, maybe it's time to take a break, he murmured gently, his hand firm around her arm as he guided her to keep her balance. Wine blinked up at him, her expression softened by the haze of drink. She let out a quiet laugh, though there was a vulnerability in her eyes she rarely showed. Oh, Jungkook, she slurred slightly, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Always so serious. I'm fine, but she wasn't. She could barely hold herself up. And Jungkook's concern deepened. Henry approached them, noticing Jungkook's hand on her arm. His expression darkened instantly. Jungkook, don't you think you are overstepping? He sneered. She's fine. We are here to celebrate. Stop acting like her chaperone. Jungkook's jaw clenched slightly, but he didn't let go of her. With all due respect, Henry, she needs some rest. He replied, his tone calm but firm. Wine looked between the two of them, blinking as if trying to comprehend the tension. She gently tugged on Jungkook's sleeve, her gaze softening. Let's go outside, Jungkook. She murmured, surprising herself with how naturally his name slipped from her lips. Without another word, Jungkook guided her outside onto the terrace, away from the loud crowd and Henry's resentful gaze. The cool night air brushed against her flushed cheeks, and she took a deep breath, steadying herself with his arm. I don't usually lose control like this, she muttered, half to herself, half to him, her expression softening in a way that made her look far younger, almost vulnerable. Jungkook watched her, a gentle look in his eyes. Everyone needs a break sometimes. You carry so much weight on your shoulders. He replied softly. For a moment, Wine looked at him, really looked at him. There was a gentleness in his gaze, an unwavering loyalty that made her heart feel strangely warm. Why do you put up with me, Jungkook? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jungkook hesitated, his hand still gently supporting her. His voice was soft, almost as if he was confessing a secret. Because you are worth it, Wine, even if you don't believe it. For once, Wine didn't pull away. She simply leaned on him, a faint smile on her lips as they stood together. Under the stars, the noise of the party fading into the background. The cool night's air seemed to calm Wine, and she leaned slightly against Jungkook. Her gaze softened. For once, she felt the weight of her defenses slipping, leaving her open and vulnerable in his steady presence. You always just take care of everything quietly, don't you? She murmured, her voice carrying a hint of wonder. Jungkook looked at her. Her expression was gentle. Someone has to, don't they? He replied with a soft chuckle. You work so hard, Wine. Sometimes I wish you had let someone take care of you too. She blinked at him, surprised by his words. No one had ever said anything like that to her. People admired her strength, her ambition, her success. But no one had ever asked if she needed someone to support her, to ease her burdens, and here was Jungkook, a man she had kept at a distance, offering her exactly that. Jungkook, why are you so kind to me? She whispered, almost as if she couldn't believe it herself. He paused, searching her gaze. His voice dropped gentle and sincere. Because I see you, Wine, not just the CEO everyone else sees, but you, with all your dreams, all your struggles. He gave a small, almost shy smile. I know you didn't ask for this marriage, but to me, it's not just an obligation. I care about you. His words stirred something deep inside her, something she had tried to bury for so long. She looked up at him, her heart racing, her eyes filled with emotion she could no longer hide. For once, she let herself truly see him, this quiet and wavering man who had always been there, patiently waiting for her to let him in. She lifted a hand, resting it on his cheek, her touch light and hesitant. Her gaze flickered over his face, lingering on his kind eyes, his gentle smile. You really do, don't you? She whispered almost to herself as if she was finally letting herself believe it. Jungkook nodded, his hand gently covering hers on his cheek. They stood like that for a moment, lost in each other's gaze, then almost instinctively. Wine leaned in closer, her breath warm against his skin. Thank you, Jungkook, for being here, for being you. Without another word, she closed the distance between them, pressing her lips softly to his in a kiss that was both tender and hesitant, as if testing the waters. Jungkook's eyes widened in surprise, but he melted into the kiss, his head gently cradling the back of her head, deepening the moment. For a few precious seconds, they were completely lost in each other, the world around them forgotten. All the barriers, all the resistance she had put up seemed to crumble as she let herself feel his warmth, his kindness, his love. When they finally pulled apart, Wine's cheeks were flushed, her gaze shy and filled with something new, something unspoken. She took a small step back. Her heart racing as she looked up at him, the reality of what just happened settling in. I don't know what came over me. She whispered, a slight smile tugging at her lips. Jungkook chuckled softly, still a bit breathless, his gaze filled with warmth. I don't mind. In fact, I think it's something I have been waiting for. He said, his smile soft yet genuine. The warm sensation of Jungkook's kiss lingered on Wine's lips, and for a brief moment she felt weightless, as if the world had stopped spinning. But the in her system wasn't done with her yet. The buzzing in her head intensified, and she swayed slightly, feeling the ground beneath her feet shift. I think I need to sit down for a minute, she murmured, her words slurring as her vision blurred. Jungkook's expression immediately turned to concern as he reached out to steady her, his arms wrapped around her waist, holding her gently. Why, you are not okay. You have had too much to drink. His voice was soft but filled with worry. She tried to steady herself, but the room felt like it was spinning, and her knees gave out. Before she could react, her vision faded to black, and she collapsed in his arms unconscious. Jungkook's heart raced as he catch her, cradling her carefully to ensure she didn't fall. His breath quickened with panic. Wine, wine, can you hear me? He whispered urgently, his hand lightly shaking as he brushed a strand of hair from her face, but she didn't respond. Her breathing was steady but slow. Her body limp against him. He was just about to call for help when he heard a low chuckle from behind him. He turned to see Henry standing at the edge of the terrace, watching them with a twisted smile. His arms were crossed, his gaze fixed on Jungkook and Wine. Well, well, what a scene, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I always knew you were weak, Jungkook, but this is pathetic. Jungkook's eyes narrowed, his protective instincts flaring. What do you want, Henry? His voice was steady, but the anger simmering beneath it was clear. Henry's smirk deepened as he took a step closer, his eyes flicking to Wine's unconscious form. You really thought you could just swoop in and be the hero, huh? She's not the same person when she's sober. You know, he said, his tone mocking. Look at her now, all vulnerable, unable to even stand on her own 2 feet. She's not your Princess Jungkook. Jungkook's grip tightened on Wine, his heart pounding with a mix of anger and concern. He knew Henry wouldn't want to speak kindly, but hearing him talk like this, as if Wine's weakness was some kind of victory, made his blood boil. She's not weak, she's just drunk, and I'm taking her back inside. Henry's smile faltered for a moment as he noticed Jungkook's determination. He was about to speak again, but instead he just watched, his eyes dark and calculating. It was clear to him that Jungkook wasn't going to back down. Do whatever you want, but don't pretend like you are the one who can fix everything. She will always be mine even if she doesn't realize it yet. Jungkook didn't respond, his focus solely on wine. He gently lifted her in his arms, cradling her against his chest, and began walking toward the door. Henry didn't try to stop him, but his words hung in the air like a threat, something that Jungkook couldn't quite shake. As he carried wine back into the party, the weight of her unconscious body pressed against him, and his mind raced with thoughts of how to take care of her, how to make sure she was okay. He couldn't help but feel a pang of doubt. Why was Henry always lurking around, waiting for his chance? But for now, all that mattered was wine. Chungo carefully carried wine inside their home, his arms wrapped gently around her fragile form. She had passed out completely at the party, and he wasn't about to let her stay there in her condition. The moment he stepped through the door, he made his way straight to the bedroom, laying her down on the bed with the utmost care. He pulled the blankets over her, adjusting them to make sure she was comfortable, and sat by the side of the bed for a moment, just watching her. Her breathing was soft and steady, but her face was pale, a slight flush remaining on her cheeks from the drink. Chongo couldn't help but feel a pang in his chest. She wasn't the cold, commanding CEO right now. She was just a woman, vulnerable and tired. And for a fleeting moment, he wished she would let herself lean on him more often, but for now, he had to let her rest. He placed a gentle kiss on her forehead before standing up to prepare some water for her, checking to make sure she had everything she might need for the night. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains and wine slowly stirred from her sleep. Her head felt heavy, her body sluggish as the fog of the previous night lingered. She blinked a few times, trying to shake off the disorientation. She could feel the warmth of the sheets around her. And for a moment, it all felt oddly comforting. Then, as the haze cleared, memories from the party began to trickle in. Her conversation with Jungkook, the kiss, the way she had felt vulnerable in his arms. Did that really happen? Her thoughts felt scattered and she rubbed her temples, trying to piece everything together. Her memory was blurry, but she could remember fragments, the warmth of Jungkook's touch, his worried voice, the way he had looked at her when she had been tipsy. She shifted, sitting up in the bed, but the moment she saw her reflection in the mirror across the room, she stiffened. She was still wearing the dress from last night, and her hair was messy. What was I thinking? She thought, the realization hitting her all at once. She had let herself get carried away, allowed herself to be weak, to give in to a moment of vulnerability. I should not have. A wave of coldness settled over her again, a defense mechanism she had built up over years. Jungkook, who had been quietly sitting up downstairs, heard the faint sounds of movement coming from upstairs. He sighed softly, his heart itching a little. He had hoped she might wake up with a bit of gratitude for the care he had shown her, but he knew better than to expect much from her. Wine had always been closed off ever since the day they were forced to marry. She had never been one to easily show her emotions. And despite his quiet hopes, he knew it would take time for her to warm up to him. He walked up to the bedroom door, knocking lightly before pushing it open. Wine, are you feeling okay? His voice was gentle, but there was a note of concern. Wine didn't look at him first. She turned her back to him, her gaze fixed firmly on the door. Her shoulders were tense, her body language shutting him out. I'm fine, she said, her voice cold. The walls she had built up around herself instantly going back up. Jungkook stood there, feeling the familiar sting of her indifference. He knew she had always kept him at arm's length, but it still hurt. Last night she had felt like maybe she was beginning to let him in. Now he realized that even the smallest crack in her armor could be quickly shut down. You don't have to be cold to me, Wine, he said softly, his words almost a whisper, but they held a quiet plea. I'm just trying to help. Wine's eyes flickered to him briefly. But she didn't respond. She didn't want to admit how vulnerable she had felt last night. She didn't want to admit that a part of her had actually appreciated his kindness, the way he had been there when no one else was, but she couldn't let herself get close to him. She wouldn't let herself need anyone, especially not someone like Jungkook. I don't need help, she said, her voice sharp as she gathered her things. I'm fine on my own. I always have been. She turned away from him, her gaze hardening again, and Jungkook stood there. Helpless, she had turned back into the woman he couldn't reach, the woman who refused to let anyone in. The silence between them grew thick, and Jungkook felt that familiar ache in his chest, but he didn't say anything more. He knew it wasn't the right time, just like it never seemed to be. Wine walked past him, her steps quick and purposeful, her expression unreadable. The wall between them was back up higher than ever, and Jungkook, despite everything, watched her go, hoping one day she would let him in again. Wine stepped out of the car, her heels clicking on the marble floor of her office building. Her mind was already racing, preparing for the important meeting ahead. The atmosphere at the office was always tense. But today there was even more pressure. The deal she was about to finalize could change everything for her company. As soon as she arrived, her assistant handed her a stack of files, but one was missing, the blue file she needed for the presentation. Where's the blue file? She asked sharply, flipping through the pile of paperwork. Her assistant glanced up nervously. I thought it was with you, ma'am. Wine frowned, frustration building up inside her. It was the one file she couldn't afford to lose. And now she couldn't find it anywhere in the office. She pulled out her phone and dialed Jungkook's number. After a few rings, he answered, his voice calm but with a slight edge of hurry. Wine, is everything okay? Where's the blue file? She snapped, her patience running thin. I need it for my meeting. Have you seen it? I have not seen it either, but wait, is it at home? He sounded as if he was already putting the pieces together. I will go check, just stay on the line. I will bring it to you. Wine's eyes narrowed in frustration as she glanced at her watch. You better hurry, Jungkook. This meeting cannot wait. He didn't need to be told twice. As she ended the call, she leaned back in her chair, tapping her fingers on the desk impatiently. Time was ticking, and she couldn't afford to lose another minute. Meanwhile, Jungkook, who had been working his shift at the restaurant, quickly told his manager he needed to leave for a bit. He rushed out of the kitchen, grabbed his jacket, and hopped on his bike. His heart raced as he tried to navigate through the crowded streets, knowing how much this file meant to Wine. I can't let her down. She needs this. He weaved through traffic, dodging cars and pedestrians, determined to get home quickly. The urgency of the situation made him push his limits, and his mind was solely focused on getting on the file to Wine. He reached home in what felt like no time at all, threw the door open, and rushed inside. His eyes scanned the house frantically, and within minutes he found the blue file in the study. A wave of relief washed over him, but it was short lived. The clock was ticking, and he needed to get to Wine's office fast. He grabbed the file, his hand gripping it tightly, as he dashed back out of the house and hopped on his bike again. He had no time to waste, not with the meeting already in full swing. But as he rushed through the streets, the unexpected happened. A car speeding through an intersection didn't see him coming. In his panic to reach Wine, Jungkook had taken a turn too quickly, and before he could react, the car collided with him. The impact was jarring. Jungkook flew off his bike, crashing into the pavement with a sickening touch. His head spun and everything around him blurred. He tried to push himself up, but the pain was overwhelming. I need to get up. I need to get up to whine, but his body refused to cooperate. The blow file was still clutched tightly in his hands. But everything else faded as the world around him turned black. Back at Wine's office, the meeting was winding down. The deal had been finalized, but something felt off. Wine kept glancing at the door, expecting Jungkook to walk in with the file any moment, but the minutes dragged on, and he still had not shown up. She checked her phone again, but there were no messages. Her frustration flared. Where is he? She muttered under her breath, her irritation growing. The meeting was over. and she had no file to show for it. The deal was secured, but it didn't feel like a victory without the final presentation. This is unbelievable. Meanwhile, at the scene of the accident, Jungkook remained unconscious on the street, the file beside him untouched. At the same time, Henry had been watching the whole situation unfold, a gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. He had been aware of the importance of the meeting and had seen the opportunity. As he sat comfortably in his office, sipping his coffee, he smirked to himself. Well, looks like things are falling into place. Jungkook, you are out of the picture for now, at least, and Wine, she will see just how much she needs me. His plan was working. Wine was angry. Jungkook was nowhere to be found, and Henry knew that this would be drive a wedge war further between them. He leaned back in his chair, feeling the rush of satisfaction. Just wait. Jungkook, I will make sure Wine never looks at you the same way again.